Welcome back, my friend. The lamps are lit, the wind has quieted, and somewhere in the shadows the Niffler has found something shiny again. But this time, it's not gold. It's a story, and tonight, he's ready to share it with you. So settle in and listen closely. It begins like this.
The morning mist was slowly lifting over the enormous arena as Ginny Potter stepped onto the grass of the Golden Eagle Stadium. The morning air was saturated with the scent of fresh grass, magical broom polish, and that particular electric tension that always preceded great Quidditch competitions. She breathed deeply, feeling familiar sensations awaken memories of her own days on the pitch. "Blimey," she whispered, raising her eyes to the stands that soared to incredible heights. The Golden Eagle Stadium, situated in the Swiss Alps, was one of the most magnificent Quidditch stadiums in Europe. Its magical architecture allowed the stands to expand or contract depending on the number of spectators, and the golden structures shimmered in the morning sun like real gold. Protective charms circled the arena, creating a soft violet gleam in the air. "Mrs. Potter?" she heard an English accent with a light German tinge behind her. Ginny turned and saw a tall, lean man of about 50 with a neat gray beard and piercing blue eyes. He wore an elegant dark blue cloak with a silver tournament emblem, a stylized image of 7 flying brooms forming a circle. "Yes, that's me," Ginny replied, extending her hand. "And you must be Mr. Maximilian Grimm?" "Indeed," the man smiled, shaking her hand. "Chief organizer of the Cup of 7 Nations. Delighted to meet a representative from the Daily Prophet. Your reputation precedes you, Mrs. Potter. I hear you once played for the Holyhead Harpies." "A few years," Ginny replied modestly. "But now I prefer telling stories rather than creating them on the pitch." Grimm nodded enthusiastically. "Wonderful. I hope you'll find many interesting stories here. The Cup of 7 Nations isn't just a tournament, it's a true celebration of Quidditch. 7 of Europe's strongest teams competing for the title of continental champion. We have representatives from Bulgaria, Germany, France, Ireland, Italy, Romania, and of course, England." Ginny retrieved her quick quotes quill and notebook from her bag. "Tell me more about the tournament format," she requested, as the quill automatically began recording their conversation. "Oh, it's very exciting." Grimm positively beamed. "Unlike ordinary tournaments where teams play each other in group stages, we have a unique system. Each team plays against all others during the week, but not ordinary matches. Each match lasts exactly 2 hours, regardless of whether the snitch is caught. The team leading on points after 2 hours receives 3 points in the tournament table. If the snitch is caught, the team receives an additional point. Most interestingly, the final is determined not only by table position, but also by a special rating spell that considers playing style, sportsmanship, and impact on spectators." "A rating spell?" Ginny raised an eyebrow. "That's something new." "Indeed. My own invention." Grimm puffed out his chest proudly. "The spell analyzes the magical energy created by players during the match, spectator reactions, and even the aesthetics of executed maneuvers. This makes the tournament truly unique. It's not simply the strongest who wins, it's the most worthy." Ginny noted this down, but something in Grimm's tone caused her mild unease. He seemed rather too pleased with himself. "And who will be refereeing the matches?" she asked. "Ah, we've assembled the true elite of international officiating. Lucius Thornberry from England has been appointed head referee, with assistants Francesca Bella from Italy and Eric Wolf from Germany. All 3 have impeccable reputations." Something flickered in Ginny's memory. Lucius Thornberry. The name was familiar to her, but she couldn't remember from where. "I'd like to speak with the teams," she said. "Can interviews be arranged?" Of course." Grimm waved his hands. "The teams have just arrived and are currently conducting training. I suggest starting with the English team, the Vimborn Wasps. Their captain, Sam Crawford, is very approachable." They set off towards the training pitch located behind the main arena. Along the way, Ginny looked around, trying to memorize every detail. The high Alpine peaks surrounding the stadium created an incredible backdrop, and the magical light posts were already beginning to glow dimly, preparing for the evening match. "First match tonight?" she asked. "Yes, at 8 in the evening. England versus Bulgaria. Both teams are in excellent form, so it promises to be thrilling spectacle." As they approached the training pitch, Ginny heard the familiar sounds of Quidditch practice, the whistle of air being cut by brooms, the dull thuds of bludgers against beaters' bats and coaches' commands. "Crawford," Grim called to a tall girl with red hair tied in a tight ponytail. "There's a journalist here from the Daily Prophet." Sam Crawford descended to earth with the grace of an experienced player. She was roughly Ginny's age, with an athletic figure and confident green eyes. On her left arm, Ginny noticed a white bandage. "Sam Crawford, captain of the Vimborn Wasps," she introduced herself, firmly shaking Ginny's hand. "And you're Ginny Potter, yes? I've read your articles. You write very well about Quidditch." "Thank you," Ginny smiled. "What's wrong with your arm? An injury?" Sam glanced at the bandage and frowned slightly. "Yes, rather strange story, actually. Yesterday evening, when we'd just arrived, I went for a walk around the stadium. I wanted to feel the atmosphere, and suddenly something stung me on the arm. Like an invisible bee or some magical insect. The arm swelled almost immediately. Did you see a medic?" Ginny asked with concern. "Of course. Madam Pickering, our team healer, said it looked like a reaction to some unusual magical creature. But the strange thing is that none of the locals know about such creatures in these mountains. Moreover, the injury is very specific. It doesn't prevent me from flying, but makes precise throws difficult. For a seeker it's not critical, but if I were a chaser..." Ginny made a note of this. "What about the other teams? Have they had similar problems?" "Here's what's interesting." Sam lowered her voice and looked around. "This morning I heard that the German team captain also has problems. Something with balance. He was apparently getting dizzy during yesterday's flight. And the French girl, Madeleine Duran, was complaining of sudden short-sightedness. Everything started after they arrived. Could it be altitude sickness?" Grim suggested, though concern was audible in his voice. "We're positioned quite high in the mountains." "I've played at altitude before," Sam shook her head. "This is something else. Besides, why haven't any of the reserve players been affected so far?" Ginny felt the familiar cold knot of intuition in her stomach. During her work at the Daily Prophet, she had learned to recognize when an ordinary sports story might turn into something bigger. "May I speak with the other captains?" she asked. "Of course, but everyone's preparing for tonight's match now," Grim replied. "Perhaps better after?" "The Bulgarian captain is free right now," Sam interjected. "Viktor Krum. He trains separately from the team." At the mention of Krum's name, Ginny started. Viktor Krum. She remembered him from the Triwizard Tournament and the World Cup. One of the best seekers in Quidditch history. "He's still playing?" she asked in surprise. "Returned to the game 2 years ago," Sam explained. "Says retirement bored him." The Wrotsaw Vultures were thrilled when he agreed to become their captain. Ginny said goodbye to Sam and Grim and set off in search of Krum. She found him at a small training pitch behind the main stadium. Even after all these years, he was still unmatched in the air. His broom moved with such grace that it seemed as though he was simply thinking about flight rather than actively controlling it. "Mr. Krum," she called when he landed. Viktor turned, and Ginny saw that the years had barely touched him. The same penetrating dark eyes, the same confidence of movement. The only things betraying his age were thin wrinkles around his eyes and a few gray threads in his dark hair. "Mrs. Potter?" He squinted slightly. "Yes, I remember you. You sat next to Hermione Granger during the Triwizard Tournament." "You have an excellent memory," Ginny smiled. "I now work as a journalist for the Daily Prophet. May I ask a few questions about the tournament?" "Certainly," Krum nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "But first, let me say, your play for the Harpies was impressive. Especially that match against Puddlemere United in 2004. Brilliant seeker work." Ginny blushed with pride, but quickly returned to business. "Thank you. Tell me, have you noticed anything strange since arriving here?" Krum's expression became more serious. "Strange is putting it mildly," he grumbled. "Yesterday evening, when I was returning to the hotel after late training, I thought someone was following me. When I turned around, no one was there, but there was a strange smell in the air, something like old parchment and bitter herbs. And this morning? This morning my deputy captain, Stanislav, couldn't get his broom off the ground at all. Says every time he tried to take off, he was overcome with nausea. And he's been flying since he was 5. Ginny wrote quickly. "Did you tell the organizers about this?" Krum snorted. "I told them. Grimm said it was probably nerves before an important tournament. And that Englishman, Thornberry, declared outright that we shouldn't pay attention to minor ailments." "Thornberry? Are you acquainted with him?" "We've met at several international matches. He's, how shall I put it, very serious about rules. Sometimes even too serious." Something in Krum's tone suggested he wanted to say more, but was hesitating. What do you mean? Ginny asked carefully. Krum looked around, making sure they were alone. 3 years ago, at the Balkan Cup, his decisions in the final match were, let's say, questionable. Several penalties he awarded looked very strange. And when Bulgarian supporters began protesting, he quickly ended the match, though the snitch hadn't been caught. And what happened? Nothing. The official investigation found nothing. But rumors, there were various rumors. Ginny felt she was approaching something important. What kind of rumors? They say that some referees at international tournaments aren't always objective in their decisions. They say there are people willing to pay for the right result. But these are only rumors, you understand. Before Ginny could ask another question, a young man in tournament organizer uniform approached them. Mr. Krum, you're requested at the medical tent, he said. You need to complete the mandatory pre-match examination. Krum nodded and looked at Ginny. It was pleasant speaking with you, Mrs. Potter. I hope your article will be fair. When he left, Ginny was alone with her thoughts. In her notebook, notes had already accumulated about strange injuries, suspicious referee behavior, and hints about corruption in international Quidditch. This was no longer ordinary sports reporting. She looked at her watch. Several hours remained until the evening match. Time to use them productively. Ginny decided to take a walk around the stadium, hoping to stumble upon something interesting. The high Alpine pines surrounding the arena formed a natural barrier, and narrow paths between them led to various auxiliary buildings, medical tents, equipment storage, team accommodation. Passing one of the tents, she heard muffled voices inside. Something in the tone of the conversation made her stop and listen. We can't allow this to continue, said a male voice with an Italian accent. If someone finds out, no one will find out, sharply interrupted another voice, this one with an English accent. Everything's under control. The effect is temporary, and no one can prove a connection. What if one of the journalists starts digging deeper? Journalists see only what we want them to see, especially that girl from the Daily Prophet. She's here for ordinary sports reporting, nothing more. Ginny felt a chill run down her spine. Were they talking about her? Are you certain the plan will work? Absolutely. By the end of the tournament, everything will be finished, and no one will even suspect that anything unusual was happening. Ginny tried to move closer, but stepped on a branch that cracked with a loud sound. The voices inside the tent immediately fell silent. What was that? Someone whispered. Ginny quickly stepped behind the nearest tree and held her breath. After a moment, she heard the tent flap opening and someone emerging. No one here, said the voice with the English accent. Probably some animal. We'd better be more careful, replied the Italian. Too much is at stake. They returned to the tent, and Ginny carefully emerged from behind the tree. Her heart was beating wildly. She had accidentally stumbled upon something serious. But what exactly? She quickly wrote down what she'd overheard in her notebook, trying to remember every word. Then she carefully crept up to the tent and glanced at the sign by the entrance. Tournament official referees, service quarters. So one of the voices belonged to a referee. But which one? And what did their plan mean? Ginny looked at her watch. An hour remained until the match began. She decided to return to the press center and do some research on the tournament referees' biographies. Perhaps this would give her some clues. The press center was located in a large tent beside the main stadium. Inside were several tables with quick quotes quills, stacks of parchment, and several magical crystals for communication with editorial offices. Ginny wasn't the only journalist. At the opposite table sat a fat man in a bright red robe, and by the window an elegant witch in French attire was conversing with her quill. Ginny sat at her table and retrieved from her bag a special research crystal, a gift from Hermione that allowed quick information searches in magical archives and libraries. She activated it and whispered, Lucius Thornberry, International Quidditch Referee. The crystal glowed blue, and after several seconds, images and text appeared in the air. Lucius Thornberry, 52 years old, born in London. Former player for Chudley Cannons, ended career in 1995 due to injury. Began refereeing career in 1997. Official international tournament referee since 2001. Married, 2 children. The information was fairly standard, but then additional details appeared. Notes: in 2003, temporarily suspended from refereeing due to accusations of bias during the Central European Cup. Accusations were not substantiated. In 2008, again temporarily suspended following complaints from the Bulgarian Quidditch Federation. Case closed for lack of evidence. Ginny frowned. 2 temporary suspensions, that was no coincidence. She tried to find more information about the tournament's refereeing panel. Francesca Bella, 45 years old, Italy. Former player for Florentine Falcons. Refereeing career since 2002. Reputation impeccable. Eric Wolf, 41 years old, Germany. Former player for Heidelberg Harriers. Refereeing career since 2000. In 2012, received official reprimand for being late to a match, but no other problems. Interesting. Bella had an impeccable reputation, and Wolf only one minor blemish. Thornberry stood out among them. Suddenly the crystal flashed red, a signal that it had found something additional. New text appeared in the air. Alert, match found in financial records. Lucius Thornberry, Eric Wolf, an unknown third party made several transactions through a Gringotts bank account during the past 6 months. Details classified. Ginny started. Financial connections between referees? This looked very suspicious. Before she could investigate further, a young organizer's assistant approached her. Mrs. Potter? Mr. Grimm requests your presence in the press box. The match will begin shortly. Ginny quickly hid the crystal and gathered her things. The press box was positioned at optimal height, offering an excellent view of the entire pitch. When she arrived, several other journalists were already seated, including the fat man in the red robe she'd seen earlier. Ah, Mrs. Potter. Grimm waved to her. Please, here's your seat. Allow me to introduce, this is Bertram Schmidt from Magical Sports Today, and this is Madame Céline Dubois from French Quidditch News. Ginny greeted her colleagues and took her seat. She looked down at the pitch where the teams were preparing for the match. The Vimborn Wasps in their bright yellow robes with black stripes looked ready for battle, despite their captain's injury. The Wrocław Vultures in dark red robes with gold details also radiated confidence. Should be an interesting match, Schmidt said, chewing something resembling a magical sweet. The Wasps are known for their aggressive style, and the Bulgarians have one of the best seekers in history. What about the referees? Ginny asked, trying to make the question sound as innocent as possible. Oh, Thornberry is very experienced, Madame Dubois replied, though some say he's sometimes too strict with penalties. Too strict is putting it mildly, Schmidt muttered. Last year at the Northern European Cup, he awarded 5 penalties in 20 minutes. The Finnish captain said after the match that half of them were questionable. This interested Ginny. What do other referees say about his style? Officially nothing, Schmidt shrugged. But unofficially, well, there are always rumors. Some say he has favorite teams. Others, that he's simply a perfectionist. At this moment, the referees entered the pitch. Thornberry in his black-gray robes looked very authoritative. He was medium height, with dark hair and confident movements. Bella and Wolf walked slightly behind him. Ladies and gentlemen, came the magically amplified voice of the announcer. Welcome to the first match of the Cup of 7 Nations. Tonight the Vimborn Wasps face the Wrocław Vultures. The stands erupted in applause. Ginny looked around. The stadium was nearly full. English supporters waved yellow-black flags while Bulgarians responded with red-gold ones. The atmosphere was electrifying. The teams took their positions in the air. Ginny watched as Sam Crawford, despite her injured arm, confidently gripped her broom. On the other side of the pitch, Viktor Krum hovered motionless, his dark eyes carefully studying the field in search of the snitch. Players ready, Thornberry announced, raising a silver whistle to his lips. Let the game begin. He blew the whistle, and 15 players immediately sprang into action. The bludgers were released and immediately flew in different directions, while the quaffle rose high into the air. The first 10 minutes of the match proceeded fairly evenly. The Wasps quickly scored the first goal thanks to an excellent maneuver by their chaser Roger Lenton, but the Bulgarians responded almost immediately. Ginny carefully recorded the flow of play, but devoted part of her attention to observing the referees. Thornberry moved confidently around the pitch, his whistle remaining silent so far. But approximately 15 minutes after the match began, something changed. Bulgarian chaser Mladenov executed an absolutely clean tackle on the English player, but suddenly Thornberry's sharp whistle sounded. Foul, he shouted. Dangerous play. Penalty to the Wasps. Ginny frowned. From her angle, the tackle looked completely legal. She glanced at the other journalists. Schmidt also looked surprised. Strange decision, he muttered. I don't see a foul there. But Madame Dubois, on the contrary, nodded approvingly. Thornberry is always very attentive to player safety. Perhaps he saw something we didn't notice. The Wasps converted the penalty, and the score became 20-10 in their favor. The game continued, and Ginny noticed more and more questionable decisions. After 30 minutes, Thornberry awarded another penalty against the Bulgarians for allegedly dangerous chaser behavior, though even from the press box it was clear that the Bulgarian was simply executing a standard block. 40-20, Ginny wrote. Already 3 questionable decisions in favor of the English. But the worst came near the end of the first half. Krum spotted the snitch near the northern goalposts and rushed after it at full speed. English seeker Crawford also noticed the golden glint and gave chase. It was a thrilling pursuit. Both seekers demonstrated incredible skill, maneuvering between other players at dizzying speed. Krum was close, very close to the snitch. His hand was already reaching for the golden ball when suddenly Thornberry's whistle sounded. Foul, the referee shouted. Bulgarian seeker impeding English player. Krum braked sharply and turned to the referee with an expression of absolute shock on his face. Even from the press box, it was clear that there had been no violation. Krum had simply calculated the flight trajectory better and overtaken his opponent from the correct side. "This is a joke," Schmidt exclaimed. Krum was playing absolutely cleanly. Bulgarian supporters in the stands began whistling and shouting protests. Some English fans also looked dissatisfied. Even they understood this was an unfair decision. But Thornberry was implacable. Penalty to the English, and the score became 50-20. During halftime, Ginny quickly descended to the team area. She wanted to speak with Krum, but he was surrounded by Bulgarian officials who were heatedly discussing something with the tournament organizers. Instead, she approached Sam Crawford. "How do you find the match?" she asked. Sam looked uncomfortable. "Honestly, some decisions seemed strange," she replied carefully. "I mean, we're winning, which is wonderful, but one would like the victory to be fair." "Do you think the referees are biased?" "I don't know," Sam lowered her voice. "But that last foul by Krum, I was nearby, and I can swear he wasn't breaking any rules. On the contrary, it was a brilliant maneuver." Ginny noted this and quickly returned to the press box before the second half began. The second half was even worse. Thornberry continued awarding questionable penalties against the Bulgarians, while leaving several obvious violations by the English unnoticed. By the end of the match, the score was 80-40 in favor of the Wasps, despite the Bulgarians playing no worse, and in places even better than their opponents. The biggest shock came in the finale. In the match's final minutes, Krum spotted the snitch again. This time he was even more careful, trying not to give the referee any excuse for a foul. But when he had almost reached the snitch, Crawford suddenly accidentally collided with him from the side. This was a clear violation by the English seeker that should have cost her at least a yellow card. But Thornberry remained deaf to the Bulgarian team's protests and allowed play to continue. As a result, the snitch was caught by Crawford, adding 150 points to the English score. Final result, 230-40. "This isn't a match, it's a farce," Schmidt grumbled angrily, packing his things. "I've been writing about Quidditch for 20 years, and I've never seen such shameless officiating." Madame Dubois, conversely, seemed satisfied. "Well, the English simply played better today." And Thornberry, as always, was very attentive to details. Ginny listened to her colleague's comments, but her thoughts were occupied with something else. She remembered the dialogue she'd overheard earlier in the referee's tent. By the end of the tournament, everything will be finished, and no one will even suspect that anything unusual was happening. Now she understood what those voices had meant. This wasn't just a tournament, it was a well-organized fraud. As the stands began to empty, Ginny decided to try speaking with Krum once more. She found him by the Bulgarian team's bus. Viktor looked tired and disappointed. "Mr. Krum," Ginny approached him carefully. "May I ask one more question?" He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not only fatigue but anger. "What do you want to ask, Mrs. Potter? About how we played poorly today? Or about how the referees were fair?" "No," Ginny replied quietly. "I want to ask if you think something wrong happened today." Krum studied her carefully. "What do you think?" "I think some decisions were very questionable, and I think it might not have been accidental." Krum was silent for a long time, then finally nodded. "Meet me tomorrow morning," he said quietly. 7 o'clock, small cafe in the village at the bottom of the mountain. "I'll tell you what I know. But be careful, Mrs. Potter. If I'm right, then you're digging in a very dangerous direction." With these words, he got into the bus, and the team departed for their hotel. Ginny stood in the empty stadium car park, watching the bus's taillights disappear into the darkness of the Alpine night. Wind from the mountains brought the scent of pines and snow, and stars shone brightly overhead. She felt she was standing on the threshold of something big. What had begun as ordinary sports reporting was transforming into an investigation that could shake the entire world of international Quidditch. Ginny retrieved her Quick Quotes quill from her bag and began composing a plan of action for tomorrow in her head. First, the conversation with Krum, then, attempting to learn more about the financial connections between referees and possibly observing their actions outside official duties. She looked at the stadium where several lights still burned and thought that somewhere there, in the darkness, the next step in a great game might be planned, a game where the stakes were much higher than sports trophies. Tomorrow will be an interesting day, she whispered to herself and headed to the hotel where her room and a long night of planning awaited. Her journalistic instinct told her that the story unfolding around her might prove to be one of the most important in her career, and she intended to see it through to the end, regardless of where it might lead. The last thing she noticed before entering the hotel was a figure in a dark cloak standing at the edge of the forest and apparently watching her. When Ginny looked in that direction again, the figure had vanished. Perhaps it was only a play of shadows in the moonlight, or perhaps someone really was watching her. Either way, tomorrow she would learn more. The morning in the Swiss Alps greeted Ginny with cool air and the scent of mountain herbs. The sun had only just appeared from behind the high peaks, flooding the valley with soft golden light. She descended the narrow path to the small village of Alpenberg, nestled at the foot of the mountain where the Golden Eagle Stadium stood. The village was typically Swiss, neat wooden houses with red-tiled roofs, narrow cobblestone streets, and small shops with windows filled with traditional Alpine goods. But Ginny knew this village was special. It was one of the few places in Switzerland where wizards and muggles lived together, thanks to special concealment charms that allowed representatives of both worlds to exist side by side without suspecting one another. The Edelweiss Café was located on the village's main square. It was a cozy place with wooden ceiling beams, hand-woven rugs on the walls, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and coffee floating through the air. At a small table in the corner, away from other patrons, Viktor Krum was already seated. The former Quidditch star looked weary after yesterday's match. Dark circles lay beneath his eyes, and his usually perfectly combed hair was somewhat disheveled. Before him sat a cup of black coffee which, by all appearances, had had time to grow cold. "Mrs. Potter," he greeted quietly when Ginny approached the table. "Please sit. Will you order something?" "Coffee, please," Ginny replied, settling opposite him. Krum summoned the waitress, a young girl in traditional Alpine dress, and ordered another coffee. When they were alone, he leaned across the table and spoke in a quiet but determined voice. "What happened yesterday was not the first time," he began. "I have been playing Quidditch for more than 20 years, and I can distinguish fair officiating from unfair." Thornberry acted deliberately. "Tell me more," Ginny requested, retrieving her notebook. 3 years ago, at the Balkan Cup I mentioned, a similar story occurred. The final was supposed to be between Bulgaria and Romania, two strong teams of approximately equal level. But throughout the match, Thornberry awarded 7 penalties against us and none against the Romanians. We lost by 30 points. What happened after the match? After the match, I tried to file an official complaint with the International Confederation of Wizards, but I was warned that I'd better not do so. "Who warned you?" Krum fell silent, as if hesitating whether to continue. "A person who introduced himself as a representative of the tournament sponsors. He offered me compensation for silence. Quite generous compensation." Ginny felt her heart begin beating faster. "And what did you do?" "Refused, of course. I have never accepted money for losses. But then they took a different approach." "What approach?" "A week after the tournament, my wife received a job at one of Bulgaria's most prestigious magical firms. A job she had dreamed of for years, but had never been accepted for previously. The salary was 3 times higher than her previous one." Ginny frowned. "You think it was a bribe?" "Absolutely. But not to me, but to her. They knew I wouldn't accept money directly, but couldn't make my wife refuse her dream job." "And you kept quiet?" "I kept quiet," Krum sighed. "And I still regret it. But then I had no proof, only suspicions. And now I have more information. After that tournament, I began monitoring international competitions, noting which referees worked at which tournaments, which teams won unexpectedly. And do you know what I discovered?" Krum retrieved a small scroll of parchment from his pocket and unrolled it on the table. On it was drawn a complex diagram with names, dates, and lines connecting various points. "This is a corruption scheme?" Ginny asked in amazement. Exactly. Look, he pointed to one corner of the diagram. Thornberry has officiated 9 tournaments in the last 3 years. At all 9 tournaments, the favorite team lost as a result of questionable refereeing decisions. At 8 of the 9 tournaments, the winning team was unexpected, which allowed someone to earn enormous money from betting. Ginny studied the diagram carefully. Indeed, the pattern was obvious. What about other referees? Eric Wolf participated in 6 such tournaments. Francesca Bella in 1, and then it seems she was unaware of what was happening. But look here, he pointed to the center of the diagram, where a name was written that made Ginny shudder. Maximilian Grimm, she read aloud. Exactly. He was the organizer or co-organizer of all these tournaments. And not just an organizer, he also owns a network of betting shops in several European countries. Ginny felt all the puzzle pieces beginning to fall into place. So the scheme is this. Grimm organizes tournaments, bribes referees, they ensure the desired result, and Grimm earns from betting? That's what I think. But proving it is very difficult. All transactions are conducted through different banks, often in different countries. Referees receive money not directly, but through gifts, jobs for relatives, free services, accidental lottery wins. What about the captain's injuries? Is this also part of the scheme? Krum nodded. I think so. If key players can be weakened before matches, it becomes easier to control results. Even with falsified officiating, it's better if everything looks plausible. Ginny recorded every word. This story was much bigger than she had initially thought. But if you know all this, why didn't you approach the authorities earlier? Which authorities? Krum smiled bitterly. The Department of Magical Games and Sports? But Grimm has friends in high positions there. The International Confederation of Wizards? They only consider official complaints with evidence, and I have no direct proof. Besides, he lowered his voice, I suspect the corruption extends far beyond Quidditch. What do you mean? Some of the people connected to this scheme have links to other magical sports, to magical artifact trading, even to politics. This might be part of something much larger. Ginny felt a chill in her stomach. She had thought she was investigating simple sports corruption, but it turned out she had stumbled upon something much more serious. What should I do? She asked. Be very careful, Krum said seriously. These people stop at nothing. If they discover you're investigating their activities. He didn't finish the sentence, but Ginny understood. What about today's match? She asked. France versus Germany. It will be the same, Krum shook his head. Either the Germans will win by a questionable score, or the French. Depends on who they've placed bets on. They concluded their conversation, and Krum left first, leaving Ginny alone with her thoughts. She sat in the cozy cafe, looking at the corruption diagram, and trying to understand what to do next. The first step should be a more detailed investigation of financial connections. But for this, she needed help. Ginny retrieved her special communication crystal from her bag and activated it. Hermione, she said quietly. After several seconds, her friend's face appeared in the crystal. Hermione looked slightly frustrated. Apparently Ginny had interrupted her work. Ginny, she smiled. How are things at the tournament? Complicated, Ginny replied briefly. Listen, I need your help. Can you investigate the financial connections of several people? Unofficially? Hermione's expression became more serious. What have you found? Possibly a corruption scheme in international Quidditch. But I need evidence. Names? Maximilian Grimm, Lucius Thornberry, Eric Wolf. Also any connections with betting shops in Europe. Understood. Give me a few hours. But Ginny, be careful. If this really is corruption at such a level. I know, Ginny nodded. Thank you. She turned off the crystal and looked at her watch. Several hours remained until today's match, and she planned to use this time for further investigation. Returning to the stadium, Ginny decided to take a small walk around the hotel where the referees were staying. This was a luxurious 5-star establishment called Alpine Peaks, located on a mountainside with a wonderful view of the valley. She entered the lobby under the guise of an ordinary tourist and sat in a cozy corner by the fireplace with a cup of tea and a newspaper. From here, she could see both the bar and the entrance to the lifts. After about half an hour, she saw Thornberry descending from the lift. He was dressed not in his official referee's robes, but in an elegant muggle suit. The head referee of the tournament approached the bar and ordered whiskey. Ginny watched him from the corner of her eye, pretending to read the newspaper. After several minutes, a man she didn't recognize joined Thornberry. This was a short, portly man of about 50 with a carefully groomed beard and an expensive watch on his wrist. They spoke quietly, but Ginny managed to catch several phrases. "The result must be convincing," the stranger was saying, "but not too obvious." "I understand," Thornberry replied. "What about that journalist?" "Nothing so far, but we're watching." Ginny felt goosebumps run down her spine. They were talking about her. "The French must lose by at least 20 points, the stranger continued. "The appropriate bets have already been placed." "No problem. Wolf will watch the details. I'll handle the overall picture." "Excellent. After the tournament, you'll receive a bonus. But remember, if anything goes wrong..." The man didn't finish the sentence, but his tone was eloquent. Ginny carefully stood and left the hotel, trying to look as natural as possible. Her heart was beating wildly. She had just heard direct confirmation of the conspiracy. But who was that stranger? And what did the phrase about watching her mean? Returning to the stadium, she decided to investigate the tournament's organizational structures a bit. Various informational brochures lay in the press center, including a list of sponsors and organizers. Studying the list, Ginny noticed several interesting details. The main sponsor of the tournament was a company called Alpine Magical Investments, which, according to the brochure's information, was engaged in various investments in magical sports and entertainment. But when she tried to find more information about this company in her research crystal, it turned out there was very little official information. Alpine Magical Investments, founded 3 years ago, director, Max Steiner, office in Zurich. Nothing more. Ginny frowned. Max Steiner. This could be the real name of the stranger from the hotel, or it might not be. She continued her research and discovered another interesting detail. Among the tournament's official partners was a betting company called Golden Snitch Betting, which had offices in England, Germany, and France. And the owner of this network, according to public records, was Maximilian Grimm. "There it is," Ginny exclaimed quietly. Now everything fell into place. Grimm organizes tournaments, bribes referees through intermediaries like Max Steiner or Alpine Magical Investments, and then earns from betting through his own betting company. A perfect scheme that allowed him to play on both fronts. But she still needed direct evidence. An overheard conversation wasn't enough. Documents, testimony, or transaction records were needed. Ginny looked at her watch. An hour remained until the match. She decided to try passing by the referee's tent once more, hoping to hear something useful. But when she approached the tent, she saw a guard standing beside it. A tall man in a dark cloak was carefully watching everyone who passed by. "Can I help you?" he asked when Ginny came closer. "Oh, I'm just taking a walk," she smiled. "Waiting for the match." "I see. And you're the journalist from the Daily Prophet, yes?" Ginny shuddered. "How did he know that?" "Yes, why?" "Nothing special. We just keep track of all journalists to ensure their safety. In the mountains, one can easily get lost." The man's smile was unpleasant, and Ginny understood this was not so much an offer of help as a warning. "Thank you for your concern," she said and hurried away. The time for today's match between France and Germany had arrived. Ginny took her place in the press box, but this time her attention was focused not so much on the game as on the referees. As Krum had predicted, the match proved to be a fake from the first minutes. Thornberry awarded penalties against the French for the slightest violations, while the Germans could do practically anything they wanted. The French captain, Jacques Dumont, after the fourth questionable penalty, flew up to Thornberry in protest, but the referee simply showed him a yellow card for unsporting behavior. "This is ridiculous," Schmidt, who was again sitting next to Ginny, muttered. "I don't understand what's wrong with Thornberry lately." "What do you mean?" Ginny asked. "Well, he used to be strict but fair. But the last few tournaments, his decisions have become very strange. As if he's playing for one of the teams." Madame Dubois, sitting on the other side, looked confused and upset, watching her countrymen suffer defeat through unfair officiating. By the end of the first half, the score was 60-20 in Germany's favor, though the French were playing no worse, and in places even better. During halftime, Ginny decided to go down to the team area. She wanted to speak with the French captain, but saw that the same guard she'd met by the referee's tent was standing near the French bench. Instead, she approached the German team. Their captain, Franz Müller, looked uncomfortable despite his team leading. "Mr. Müller," Ginny addressed him, "what are your impressions of the match?" Müller looked around, as if making sure no one was listening. "Honestly, Mrs. Potter, some decisions seemed too lenient toward us," he said quietly. "I've been playing for 15 years, and I know when a foul is real and when it's not. Do you think the referees are biased in your favor? I'm saying nothing officially, Mueller replied quickly. But this isn't the match I'd want to win. Ginny noted this and returned to the press box. The second half was an even worse farce than the first. Final score, 140-50 in Germany's favor. When the match ended, Ginny saw Thornberry and Wolf quickly leave the pitch without stopping for the usual post-match procedures. She decided to try following them, but the familiar guard stopped her at the stadium exit. "Mrs. Potter," he said with false politeness, "Mr. Krum would like to speak with you." "Now?" "Yes, it won't take much time." She had no choice. The guard led her to a small office under the stands, where Maximilian Krum was waiting for her. The tournament organizer didn't look as friendly as during their first meeting. "Mrs. Potter," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "I hear you've been very actively researching our tournament." "That's wonderful. Journalistic curiosity is always good." "Thank you," Ginny replied carefully. "But I wanted to warn you about several things. The Alps are a dangerous place. Easy to get lost, fall off a cliff, or get caught in an avalanche, especially for those who don't know the terrain and wander where they shouldn't." The threat was veiled but absolutely clear. "I'll be careful," Ginny replied quietly. "Excellent. And one more thing. If you have any questions about the tournament, it's better to address them directly to me. No need to trouble our referees or players with strange questions. They're here to play, not for interviews about, shall we say, conspiracy theories." Ginny nodded, not trusting her voice. "Then we understand each other," Krum smiled. "Tomorrow we have another wonderful match, Italy versus Romania. I hope your article about the tournament will be positive and focus on sporting achievements." She left the office feeling she had just received her final warning. Now Krum knew she suspected something, and this made her situation very dangerous. Returning to her hotel, Ginny activated her communication crystal and contacted Hermione. "I found what you asked for," her friend said without greeting. "And it's worse than you thought. Tell me, Maximilian Krum really does own a network of betting shops. But that's not all. He also has shares in several professional Quidditch teams, in a sports equipment manufacturer, and even in a magical hospital that specializes in sports injuries. That's a conflict of interest." "Absolutely. But the worst part is that money comes not only from betting. I found traces of transactions from very suspicious sources, offshore accounts, anonymous transfers, even some connections with organizations the OR department is investigating for suspected money laundering." Ginny felt her blood run cold. "Hermione, I think I'm in serious danger." "What happened?" Ginny told her about the conversation with Krum and the guards watching her. "Ginny, we need to get you out of there immediately," Hermione said worriedly. "I'll contact Harry." "No," Ginny interrupted sharply. "If I leave now, they'll cover their tracks and hide everything. I might not get another chance to expose them." "But," "Hermione, send all the information you found to the Daily Prophet and to the Aura department. If something happens to me, at least the evidence will remain." "Ginny, this is too risky." "Perhaps. But this story might be the most important of my career. And if I'm right, this corruption might spread far beyond sports. Someone has to stop it." She ended the conversation and sat on the bed, looking out the window at the night Alps. Tomorrow she would have to make a choice, flee to safety or stay, and try to gather even more evidence. And for now, she had a long night ahead to plan her next steps. And she needed to be very careful, because now she knew she was being watched. Ginny awoke at 5 in the morning to a strange sound outside her window, as if someone was carefully stepping on gravel by the hotel. She crept to the window and cautiously peered through the curtains. In the pre-dawn twilight, the familiar guard stood by the hotel entrance, and beside him, 2 more people in dark cloaks. Ginny's heart began beating faster. They really were watching her, and it seemed the situation was escalating. She quickly dressed, gathered the most essential items into a small bag, and decided to leave the hotel through the service exit. She was fortunate. The hotel was an old building with several exits, and one of them led directly to the garden behind the building. Carefully making her way between rose bushes and alpine pines, Ginny reached a forest path that led up the mountainside. She knew that there, approximately half an hour's walk away, was a small mountain hut used by local skiers in winter. Now in summer, it should be empty. The path proved more difficult than she had expected. Sharp stones and tree roots made the ascent challenging, and the morning mist complicated visibility. But Ginny was in good physical condition thanks to years of playing Quidditch, and after 45 minutes she reached the small wooden hut. The hut turned out to be unlocked, a custom in these mountains where travelers often needed shelter from bad weather. Inside were simple wooden furniture, a fireplace, and a small kitchen. Ginny built a fire in the fireplace, brewed tea from supplies she had brought, and sat down to plan her next actions. First, she activated her communication crystal and tried to contact the Daily Prophet editorial office. But the crystal only flickered weakly. The connection was poor in the mountains. "Damn," she muttered and tried again. This time she managed to contact Editor-in-Chief Barnabas Cuff. "Ginny," his voice sounded intermittent through the interference. "Where are you?" "The sound is very poor." "Mr. Cuff, I'm in the mountains investigating corruption at the tournament," Ginny said quickly. "I need help. They're watching me." "What? Who's watching?" "Ginny, you're speaking in riddles. Listen carefully. Maximilian Grimm has organized a corruption scheme. He's bribing referees to control match results and earn from betting. I have evidence, but I'm in danger." "Ginny, are you certain?" "Grimm is a respected man. He's organized dozens of tournaments." "That's exactly why it works." Ginny interrupted. "Contact Hermione Weasley. She'll send you all the evidence she's gathered. And send someone here to help." "All right, but..." The connection broke. Ginny tried several times to restore it, but in vain. She was cut off from the outside world. She looked at her watch, 8 in the morning. Today there was supposed to be a match between Italy and Romania, and tomorrow, between Ireland and England. By her calculations, Grimm planned to complete his scheme precisely at the final match, which was to take place the day after tomorrow. But first, she needed to learn more about today's plans of the conspirators. Ginny decided to descend to the village by another path that led from the opposite side of the mountain. This took more time, but allowed her to avoid meeting Grimm's people. In the village, she went to a small shop and bought a hat and sunglasses, a simple but effective disguise. Then she headed to the stadium, trying to stay away from the main roads. Around the stadium, the usual pre-match bustle reigned. Supporters in Italian green-white scarves and Romanian yellow-blue flags filled the streets around the arena. Ginny mingled with the crowd and carefully approached the service facilities. Her plan was simple: try to get into the referee's tent or Grimm's office and find documents that would confirm the conspiracy. She understood this was risky, but she had no other options. Walking around the stadium, she noticed that security had been increased. People in dark suits stood by every entrance, carefully examining everyone who passed by. They were clearly looking for her. "I need a different plan," Ginny muttered to herself. She remembered that during her work with the Harpies, she had had to perform reconnaissance flights, studying the tactics of opposing teams by observing their training from the air. Perhaps this experience would now come in handy. Ginny knew that in the forest by the stadium, there was a small clearing where local amateur Quidditch players trained. There should be brooms there that she could borrow for a few hours. Reaching the clearing, she indeed found several brooms left by local players. Choosing the best, an old but sturdy Comet 180, she took to the air. From above, the stadium looked like an enormous golden crown gleaming in the sun. Ginny circled it in a wide arc, trying not to attract the attention of security. From here, she could see the layout of all buildings, entrances, and service areas. Most interesting was what she noticed behind the administrative building. Several expensive Muggle cars and magical carriages stood there. By one of the carriages, she recognized Grimm's figure, speaking with several people in expensive suits. Ginny descended lower, trying to overhear the conversation, but here she encountered trouble. One of the magical carriages suddenly rose into the air, and a red spark shot from it, an alarm signal. "She's here!" Ginny heard a shout from below. "On a broom!" Without hesitation, she sharply turned her broom and raced back to the forest at full speed. 2 pursuers were already racing after her on fast sports brooms. A fierce chase began in the sky over the Alpine forests. Ginny used all her skill as a former professional player, diving between trees, circling rocks, and using air currents for additional speed. But her pursuers were no less experienced and were gradually closing in. When one of them almost reached her, Ginny made a desperate maneuver. She dove sharply down between tall pines and raced along a mountain stream at breakneck speed. Water and stones flickered beneath her, and tree branches touched her shoulder. The maneuver worked. One of the pursuers didn't dare follow her in such dangerous conditions, and the other, attempting to do so, nearly crashed into a cliff. Ginny continued flying along the stream until she reached a small mountain lake. There she landed, hid the broom in bushes, and herself climbed into a cave she had noticed in the cliff by the shore. Her heart was beating wildly, and the hand with which she had gripped the broom was trembling from tension. But she had escaped. For now. Sitting in the cave and waiting for the pursuers to fly away, Ginny thought over everything she had seen. Grimm's meeting with strangers by the stadium was clearly important. Perhaps these were investors or accomplices in the conspiracy. When the sky above the lake was clear of brooms, Ginny emerged from the cave. She decided to return to the mountain hut and wait for evening. Under cover of darkness, it would be easier to penetrate the stadium territory. On the way back, she found a small mountain stream and drank cold water. The Alpine air was clean and fresh, but Ginny barely noticed the surrounding beauty. All her thoughts were occupied with the evening plan. At the hut, she used kitchen utensils to prepare simple food and tried once more to contact Hermione. This time the connection was slightly better. "Ginny!" Hermione exclaimed joyfully when her face appeared in the crystal. "I was worried. Harry also wants to speak with you." "Hello," said a familiar voice, and Harry's face appeared in the crystal. "Ginny, what's happening there?" he asked worriedly. "Hermione told me about the corruption, but she says you're in danger." "Everything's complicated," Ginny replied briefly. "They're hunting me, but I can't leave now. This story is too important." "Gin, let me come," Harry suggested. "I can bring several Aurors." "No," Ginny interrupted sharply. "If an official group of Aurors arrives, Grimm and his people will cover everything up and disappear. And they'll destroy the evidence. But you can't handle this alone." "I can and I will. Listen, Harry, tell the Auror department that tomorrow evening, after the final match, they should be ready for arrests. By then, I'll try to gather enough evidence." "Ginny, trust me. I know what I'm doing." The connection broke again, and Ginny was left alone with her plans. When the sun began to set behind the mountain peaks, she prepared for the night operation. She put on dark clothes and took a small magical lamp that glowed with dim blue light. At 10 in the evening, she descended to the stadium. The territory was lit, but not as brightly as during the day. Most of the workers had already gone home after today's match, which, according to her observations from the mountain, had also been rigged in favor of the Italians. Ginny circled the stadium perimeter, looking for the best way to penetrate inside. There was security, but not too dense. Apparently Grimm didn't expect her to dare return so quickly. She found a small service window on the first floor of the administrative building that was protected only by a simple lock. Several minutes of work with magical tools, and she was inside. The corridor was dark and empty. Ginny moved carefully along the walls, illuminating the path with her dim lamp. She was looking for Grimm's office or any place where documents might be stored. On the second floor, she found what she was seeking. A door with a sign Maximilian Grimm, chief organizer, was locked with a magical lock, but Ginny remembered several spells from her time in Dumbledore's army. "Alohomora," she whispered, directing her wand at the lock. Nothing happened. The lock was more complex. She tried several more spells, and finally the door opened with a quiet click. Grimm's office was luxuriously furnished, a large oak desk, leather armchairs, walls hung with photographs from various tournaments. On the desk stood a large magical crystal, probably used for communication. Ginny began searching the desk. In the top drawer, she found several contracts with betting companies. In the bottom, correspondence with various individuals. But the most interesting was in the side drawer. There lay a small black notebook with records. Opening it, Ginny whistled. It was an operations diary. On each page were dates, referees' names, sums of money, and match results. Everything was detailed. July 15th, Thornberry, 5,000 Galleons. England wins by 20 plus points. July 17th, Wolf plus Thornberry, 7,500 Galleons. Germany wins. July 19th, Thornberry plus Bella, 10,000 Galleons. Italy wins. And at the very end, an entry that made her heart stop. July 21st, final. All three referees. 50,000 Galleons. Ireland must lose. Nikola Volkov ensures additional pressure. After match, elimination of excess witnesses. Ginny quickly turned the page and found an explanation. Nikola Volkov was a hired wizard who specialized in psychological influence, that is, intimidation and removal of unwanted persons. "Merlin's beard," she whispered. "They're planning to kill me." She quickly photographed all pages of the diary with a special magical device and put the notebook back. Now she had direct evidence of the conspiracy, but as she was preparing to leave, she heard a quiet click behind her, the sound of wands aimed in her direction. "Don't move, Mrs. Potter," said a cold voice. Ginny slowly turned and saw 3 people in dark robes. One of them was the familiar guard. The other 2 were strangers, but equally dangerous. "Hands up," the guard ordered, and wand on the floor. Ginny slowly raised her hands, but didn't release her wand. "Mr. Grimm was very eager to speak with you," the guard continued. "It seems you've seen too much." "I haven't seen anything," Ginny tried to lie. "Of course," the guard smiled. "That's why you were breaking into his office at midnight. Just curiosity." He took a step forward, but Ginny was ready. Years of training in Dumbledore's army and professional Quidditch hadn't been in vain. "Stupefy," she shouted, directing her wand at the nearest opponent. The red beam hit the guard in the chest, and he fell. But the other 2 responded immediately. "Expelliarmus! Petrificus totalis!" Ginny managed to dodge the first spell, but the second caught her shoulder, partially freezing her arm. She responded with a series of rapid spells. "Protego! Impedimenta! Confringo!" The shield charm deflected another attack. The impediment jinx made one of the attackers stumble, and the blasting curse blew out the window in the office. Using the confusion, Ginny jumped through the broken window. Fortunately, she was only on the 2nd floor, and magic softened her landing on the flower bed by the building. While the attackers descended, she managed to run to the forest. There she grabbed the hidden broom and took to the air just as the pursuers ran out of the building. But this time there were more of them, 5 wizards on fast brooms, and all had the task of not letting her escape. Another chase began, this time in the night sky over the Alps. Stars shone brightly overhead, while below the lights of the village and stadium were visible. Ginny flew at the limit of the old broom's capabilities, using every skill acquired over years of sporting career. The pursuers split up, trying to surround her. Ginny understood that in open terrain they would win. There were more of them, and their brooms were faster. She needed to find a place where she could use the landscape to her advantage. She remembered the cave by the lake where she had hidden in the morning. If she could get there. Sharply turning her broom, Ginny raced toward the lake at maximum speed. All 5 pursuers followed her, and some began sending combat spells in her direction. Red and green beams flew past her head. One barely missed her broom. Ginny responded with her own spells without turning around. "Confringo! Impedimenta!" One of the pursuers cried out in pain. Apparently the spell had reached its target. The lake appeared ahead, dark and mysterious in the moonlight. Ginny descended almost to water level and raced toward the opposite shore where the cave was. But here a trap awaited her. 3 more wizards rose from the shore. They had been waiting for her precisely here. "Stop," one of them shouted. "Surrender, and we won't cause harm." Ginny found herself between 2 fires, 5 pursuers catching up from behind, and 3 waiting ahead. There seemed to be no escape. But then she remembered one of the most difficult maneuvers she had learned with the Harpies, the Wronski defensive feint. She had never performed it in real conditions, only in training, and it was very risky. "Well," she whispered, "nothing else remains." Ginny sharply raised her broom's nose and began rapidly gaining altitude. The pursuers thought she was trying to escape upward and rushed after her. When she had climbed high enough, Ginny suddenly flipped her broom and began diving straight down at maximum speed. The pursuers, not expecting such a maneuver, tried to repeat it, but were too late. At the last moment, when it seemed she would crash into the lake, Ginny sharply leveled her broom and raced over the water's surface. Spray touched her face, but she remained airborne. 2 pursuers failed to repeat the maneuver and fell into the lake. Another crashed into a tree on the shore. The rest were confused for several critical seconds. This was enough. Ginny raced over the lake, climbed along the opposite shore, and disappeared into the darkness of the mountain forests. When she finally landed by the familiar hut, her hands were trembling from fatigue and adrenaline. But in her bag lay photographs of Grimm's diary, the best evidence of conspiracy one could imagine. Now it remained to wait for tomorrow's final and ensure that justice prevailed. But first, she needed to survive until morning. The morning of the final day greeted Ginny with the troubling sounds of Muggle helicopters circling the mountains. The Swiss police had probably received reports about the nocturnal incidents at the stadium and lake. But Ginny knew this was only a cover. Grimm and his people were using all available resources to find her. She hadn't slept all night, contemplating the plan of action for today. The final match between Ireland and England was to begin at 7 in the evening, and it was during this match that Grimm planned to complete his greatest fraud. According to the diary, the stakes on this match were enormous, tens of millions of galleons from investors across Europe. At 8 in the morning, the communication crystal came to life, and a familiar voice sounded from it. Ginny? Ginny, are you there? It was Hermione, and she sounded very concerned. Here, Ginny replied quickly. What's new? Bad news. Harry tried to organize an official operation through the department, but someone blocked it at the highest level. They say there isn't sufficient evidence for international intervention. Ginny wasn't surprised. Corruption, as Krum had said, extended far beyond sport. Any good news? Harry's coming anyway. Unofficially. He left an hour ago with several Auror friends. But this means that if something goes wrong, there'll be no official support. When will they arrive? By noon. Harry says you should stay away from the stadium until they arrive. Hermione, tell him I can't wait. If Krum learns that Aurors are coming, he might shut everything down and flee. Today's final is my only chance to catch him red-handed. Ginny, don't do anything reckless. I'll be careful, but this story ends today. She turned off the crystal and began preparing. Her plan was risky, but it had to work. She would wait until the final match began, and then, when all attention was focused on the game, try to present the evidence to journalists and officials present at the tournament. But first, she needed to reach the stadium without falling into the hands of Krim's people. Around noon, Ginny heard the sound of brooms over the forest. At first, she thought these were pursuers again, but then she recognized a familiar voice. Ginny, where are you? It was Harry. She ran out of the hut and waved her hands. A minute later, 5 Aurors landed beside her, Harry and 4 of his colleagues from the department. Gin. Harry hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. Are you all right? We were worried. Everything's fine, she reassured him. But we have little time. They're hunting me, and they know I know about their scheme. Tell us everything from the beginning, said one of the experienced Aurors, sitting on a tree stump by the hut. Ginny quickly recounted the entire story, from first suspicions to the night operation in Krim's office. When she showed photographs of the diary, the Aurors' faces became more serious. These are serious accusations, said one of the experienced Aurors, studying the records. But the evidence is convincing. The problem is that we're here unofficially. If we start arresting people without Swiss ministry sanction, it could create a diplomatic scandal, finished another Auror. Then what can we do? Ginny asked. Catch them red-handed, Harry said decisively. During tonight's match, if we can record how they falsify the result, the Swiss will be forced to intervene. But how? Krum knows I'm alive and that I have evidence. He'll be ready for anything. That's exactly why we need a clever plan, the third Auror interjected. Something they won't expect. The next hour they discussed various options. Eventually, a decision was reached. Ginny would return to the stadium as a journalist, but this time under the protection of invisible Aurors. Harry and 2 of his colleagues would be in the crowd of spectators, the rest near the service facilities. All would have communication crystals for quick contact. What about the Swiss authorities? Ginny asked. I contacted Captain Werner Stoltz of the Swiss Magical Aurors, Harry said. I told him about our suspicions. He can't act officially yet, but promised to be ready with a team near the stadium. Good, Ginny nodded. Then we begin. They reached the stadium by different routes. Ginny arrived as an ordinary journalist, but with a new hairstyle and glasses, a simple but effective disguise. By then, she had managed to speak by telephone with the Daily Prophet editor and received official support for publishing an article about corruption. The atmosphere around the stadium was electrifying. Thousands of supporters in green Irish and white English scarves filled the streets. Songs, laughter, and friendly arguments about who would win could be heard everywhere. In the press box, Ginny took her usual seat. Schmidt and Madame Dubois were already there, both looking excited before the big match. Ah, Mrs. Potter. Schmidt greeted her. We were worried. Where have you been the last few days? Working on a big story, Ginny smiled. Today it will see the light. Shortly before the match began, Maximilian Krum climbed to the press box. He looked tense but tried to maintain his usual friendly smile. Esteemed journalists, he said, today we witness history. The first Cup of 7 Nations concludes with a grandiose final. But when his gaze stopped on Ginny, his expression changed. The smile became cold and unfriendly. Mrs. Potter, he said quietly, approaching closer. What a surprise. I thought you had left us. Why would I miss the final? Ginny asked innocently. It's history after all. Indeed, Krum smiled, but there was no warmth in his eyes. History. I hope your article will be balanced." With these words, he left, but Ginny noticed how he made a sign to one of the guards by the box entrance. The teams appeared on the field to loud ovations. The Irish team, the Kenmare Kestrels, in their traditional emerald green robes, looked confident and ready for battle. The English Vimborne Wasps in yellow-black colors also demonstrated determination, despite injuries to several key players during the tournament. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcer's voice, "the final of the Cup of Seven Nations, Ireland versus England." Ginny activated her communication crystal. "Everyone in position?" she asked quietly. "Harry here," came the voice from the crystal. "I see Grim in the VIP box. Several strangers in expensive robes beside him. Jones here, watching the service entrances. Lots of additional security. Smith in position. I have visual contact with the referees. Thornberry looks very tense." The referees entered the field. Thornberry, Wolf, and Bella looked serious and concentrated. But Ginny noticed something strange. Bella was holding not the usual silver whistle, but a golden one. This hadn't been at previous matches. "Strange," she muttered and activated her research crystal. "Magical golden whistle." The search result made her shudder. The golden whistle was a magical artifact that could influence the concentration and reactions of nearby players. Legal in some leagues, but forbidden at international tournaments. "Harry," she whispered into the crystal, "Referee Bella has a golden whistle. It's a forbidden magical artifact." "Understood." Recording as a violation. The match began, and it immediately became clear that something was wrong. The Irish players, who had demonstrated flawless technique in previous matches, suddenly began making strange mistakes. Their passes became inaccurate, and their reactions slow. The English, conversely, played as if in training. Every movement was precise, every maneuver ideal. "It's because of the whistle," Ginny realized. "It only affects the Irish." In the 10th minute of the match, Thornberry awarded the first questionable penalty against Ireland. Then a second, then a third. "Schmidt," Ginny said quietly to her neighbor, "don't you notice anything strange about the officiating?" The portly journalist nodded. "Of course I notice. This is the worst officiating I've seen in 20 years. But what can we do?" "We can tell the truth," Ginny said decisively. She stood up and loudly declared, "Esteemed journalist colleagues, I have a statement about serious violations at this tournament." Everyone in the press box turned to her. Some looked surprised, others interested. "Mrs. Potter, what are you doing?" Madame Dubois asked worriedly. "Exposing a corruption scheme that has lasted throughout the tournament," Ginny said loudly. "I have evidence that Maximilian Grimm has been bribing referees to falsify results." Silence fell in the box. Everyone stared at her with shock and disbelief. "These are serious accusations," Schmidt said. "Do you have evidence?" "Yes." Ginny retrieved photographs of the diary. "Here are Grimm's own records about bribing referees and planning match results." But suddenly she felt someone grab her arm. Turning, she saw two guards who had appeared in the box. "Mrs. Potter," one of them said, "you need to come with us." "She's not going anywhere," Schmidt exclaimed, standing up. "This is a journalist. She has the right to freedom of speech." "I support this," Madame Dubois joined in. "If she has evidence of corruption, we must hear it." Other journalists also began protesting. The situation was quickly spiraling out of Grimm's control. At this moment, something strange happened on the field. Irish seeker Michael O'Malley suddenly stopped in midair and began shaking his head, as if trying to get rid of some sound. Then he screamed and flew headlong toward the stands. "Something's wrong with the players," someone in the crowd shouted. Several other Irish players also began behaving strangely. One fell from his broom. Another began flying chaotically, having lost orientation. "It's the whistle," Ginny realized. Bella has intensified the artifact's influence. She activated her communication crystal. "Harry, act now. The players are in danger." "Understood," he replied. "Everyone forward." Suddenly 5 men rose from the stands, Harry and his team. They raced toward the field on brooms, their aura robes billowing behind them. "Stop the match!" Harry shouted, flying toward the referees. "This is illegal." But Thornberry wasn't about to surrender. He aimed his wand at Harry. "Stupefy." Harry dodged and responded with his own spell. Expelliarmus. A magical battle began right over the Quidditch pitch, while thousands of spectators watched in shock. Chaos also began in the stands. People screamed, fled, or conversely, tried to get closer for a better view. Many drew their wands, preparing to defend themselves. In the press box, Ginny took advantage of the confusion and broke free from the guards. "Colloportus!" she shouted, blocking the box doors. Now the journalists were locked inside with her and the guards, but at least other grim people couldn't enter. "Listen, everyone," Ginny called out. "I'll show you the real truth about this tournament." She quickly spread the diary photographs on the table for everyone to see. "Here are Maximilian Grimm's records about bribing referees," she explained. "Here are the sums he paid for each falsified result. And here's his plan for today. The Irish must lose so he can earn 50,000 galleons from betting." Schmidt, Madame Dubois, and other journalists leaned over the photographs. Their faces became increasingly shocked with each record they read. "My God," Madame Dubois whispered. "It's true. All those strange decisions, questionable penalties. I knew something was wrong," Schmidt exclaimed. "Now everything makes sense." Meanwhile, the battle on the field continued. Harry and his colleagues fought with Thornberry and Wolf, while one of the aurors tried to catch up with Bella, who still held the golden whistle. Two other aurors appeared from the side of the stands, leading a group of Swiss aurors headed by Captain Stoltz. "Stop the match," Stoltz shouted into a magical loudspeaker. "This is an official order from the Swiss Ministry of Magic." But the most important thing happened when the English auror finally caught up with Bella. "Expelliarmus," he shouted. The golden whistle flew from the referee's hands and fell onto the field grass. Immediately the Irish players came to their senses. O'Malley, who had been falling toward the ground, managed to level his broom. Other players also began orienting normally in space. "What the devil?" shouted Irish Captain Sean McKenna. "What happened to me?" "You were enchanted," Harry replied, still keeping Thornberry at wand point. "Forbidden magical artifact." Stoltz landed beside the golden whistle and carefully picked it up. "Indeed a forbidden artifact," he confirmed. "This is a serious violation of international magical law." Thornberry and Wolf were disarmed and taken into custody. Bella was crying, saying she didn't know she was doing anything illegal. She had been told it was simply a new type of whistle. But Maximilian Grimm wasn't about to surrender without a fight. From the VIP box, he aimed his wand at the stands full of people. "If I can't have my tournament, then no one can. Confringo Maxima." A powerful blasting curse flew toward the packed stand. Thousands of people could have died, but Ginny was ready. She blew open the blocked doors of the press box and leaped outside. "Protego tot alum," she shouted, directing all her magical power into creating a protective shield. An enormous blue barrier appeared between Grimm's spell and the stands. The explosion struck the shield and dissipated in harmless sparks. "Little girl, you've made a big mistake," Grimm said coldly, aiming his wand at Ginny. But before he could do anything, a voice behind him said, "No, you made the mistake." Grimm turned and saw Viktor Krum with a group of Bulgarian aurors. "Stupefy," several voices shouted simultaneously. Red beams hit Grimm from all sides, and he fell unconscious. Gradually silence settled over the stadium. Swiss aurors arrested the last accomplices in the conspiracy, journalists made notes for their articles, and medical wizards examined injured players. Ginny stood on the press box balcony, looking at all this with a sense of deep satisfaction. Justice had prevailed. "Gin." Harry landed beside her on a broom. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she smiled. "More than all right. The story is finished." "And what will the headline be?" he asked. Ginny thought for a moment, looking at the golden whistle in Captain Stoltz's hands. Ginny Weasley and the silver whistle. How corruption nearly destroyed magical sport. But why silver? The whistle was golden. "Because true justice has the color of silver," Ginny replied. "Pure, untarnished silver." Below, journalists were already recording her words for their own articles. Tomorrow all of magical Europe would learn the truth about the Cup of Seven Nations and the corruption scheme that had nearly succeeded. But most importantly, Quidditch was once again free from dishonest play. And that was the best reward for a journalist who had risked her life for the truth. 3 days after the events at the Cup of Seven Nations, the entire magical world was buzzing with news. The Daily Prophet, which weekly French Quidditch news, Magical Sports Today, all leading publications dedicated their front pages to Ginny Potter's investigation. "Corruption scandal rocks European Quidditch," screamed the headlines. "Daily Prophet journalist exposes million galleon conspiracy." "The Golden Whistle," how magical artifacts were used for deception. Ginny sat in a cozy cafe in central London, reading the morning papers and sipping coffee. Her article in the Daily Prophet occupied 4 full pages and contained all the evidence she had gathered during the tournament, from photographs of Grimm's diary to testimonies from players and referees. But most pleasing was that the story hadn't ended with mere exposure. The consequences were unfolding with each passing day. Knock, knock, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Ginny turned and saw Viktor Krum standing by her table with a smile on his face. The former Quidditch star looked much better than during their previous meetings. The worry and fatigue had vanished from his face. "Mr. Krum," Ginny exclaimed in surprise. "What are you doing in London?" "Business," he replied, sitting opposite her. "The Bulgarian Quidditch Federation sent me to participate in hearings at the International Confederation of Wizards. Thanks to you and your work, a real investigation into corruption in international sport has finally begun." Ginny smiled. "And how are things going?" "Better than I hoped." Krum ordered coffee from a passing waitress. "Thornberry and Wolf have already confessed to all charges. Francesca Bella received a suspended sentence. The commission decided she truly didn't know about the Golden Whistle's illegality. But as for Grimm, what about Grimm? 20 years in Azkaban, plus confiscation of all property. It turned out the corruption scheme was much larger than we thought. He had been controlling tournament results in 5 different countries for the past 7 years. Ginny whistled. 7 years. How many honest teams were robbed because of this? Many. But now justice is being restored. The International Confederation has decided to rerun all tournaments whose results were falsified. Teams that unfairly lost will receive compensation and the opportunity to participate in additional competitions. What about the Cup of 7 Nations? It was cancelled. Officially, the tournament never took place. But, Krum smiled, there's talk of holding a new, genuine tournament next year, with new organizers, new referees, and the strictest security measures in Quidditch history. They talked for another half hour, discussing further prospects for cleaning up the world of Quidditch from corruption. When Krum was about to leave, he turned back to Ginny. "Mrs. Potter, allow me to say something personal. What you did was very brave. You risked your life for the sake of justice in the sport we all love. Not every journalist would dare to do such a thing." "It was simply my job," Ginny replied modestly. "No," Krum shook his head. "It was much more than a job. It was a calling." After he left, Ginny pondered his words. Was it truly a calling? She had always wanted to tell interesting stories, but this one had proved special. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, she was to meet with Daily Prophet Editor-in-Chief Barnabas Cuff to discuss future plans. The newspaper's editorial office was in high spirits. Circulation had tripled in the last 3 days, and other publications were literally bombarding the Daily Prophet with questions about how they had managed to conduct such a thorough investigation. "Ginny," Cuff greeted her in his office with a broad smile. "Heroine of the day. Sit down, sit down. Do you want tea? Coffee? Champagne?" "Coffee, please," Ginny smiled. "Listen," Cuff began, settling behind his desk. "I've received 15 offers from different publications. Everyone wants to poach you. Which Weekly is offering to double your salary, Magical Sports Today, your own column, and complete freedom in choosing topics." Ginny raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" "I think you deserve better conditions here with us. So I'm offering you the position of deputy editor of the sports department. 60% salary increase, your own office, and you choose which stories to work on yourself." Ginny was silent for a minute, considering the proposal. "What about ordinary sports reporting? Covering matches, interviewing players?" "Of course, part of the work will remain. But you'll also have the opportunity to pursue serious investigations. In the world of Quidditch, as it turns out, there are still many problems that need journalistic attention." Ginny thought about the offer. On one hand, it was an excellent career opportunity. On the other, she worried about losing that direct contact with sport that ordinary reporting work gave her. "May I think about it until tomorrow?" she asked. "Of course. But don't delay. Other offers aren't eternal either." After the meeting with Cuff, Ginny headed home. She and Harry had bought a house in the Grimmauld Place area, not far from the old Order of the Phoenix headquarters, but in a much more pleasant part of the district. It was a lovely 3-story house with a small garden behind it where magical roses grew that bloomed year-round. Harry was still at work. After the events in Switzerland, the Aura department had received several new cases connected to corruption in various spheres of magical society. It seemed Grimm's scheme had been only the tip of the iceberg. Ginny brewed tea and sat in the garden, enjoying the afternoon sun and quiet. After a tense week, This was incredibly pleasant, simply sitting and not thinking about investigations, evidence, or danger. But the quiet didn't last long. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, an owl flew to the house with a letter. It was official parchment with the seal of the International Confederation of Wizards. Dear Mrs. Potter, with great respect, we address you on behalf of the Ethics in Magical Sport Commission. Your investigation of the corruption scheme at the Cup of Seven Nations has become a catalyst for fundamental changes in the world of international Quidditch. In connection with this, we have the honor to invite you to participate in creating a new system of control over the honesty of sporting competitions. Your experience as a journalist and knowledge of Quidditch make you an ideal candidate for the position of consultant on anti-corruption matters. This work would involve travel throughout Europe, participation in the most prestigious tournaments, and the opportunity for real influence on the future of magical sport. We await your response. Respectfully, Eleanor Graysfield, Head of the Ethics in Magical Sport Commission International Confederation of Wizards. Ginny reread the letter twice. This was an incredible opportunity, working at the international level, helping to clean up sport from corruption, traveling the world. But this would also mean regular departures, less time at home, less time with Harry. She folded the letter and placed it on the table. Too many offers in one day. She really needed to think everything through. At 7 in the evening, Harry returned home. He looked tired but satisfied. Hello, he kissed her on the cheek. How was your day? Interesting, Ginny replied. And yours? We arrested 2 more people connected to Grimm's scheme. It turned out they were also involved in counterfeiting sports equipment, selling poor-quality brooms disguised as professional models. Seriously? Very seriously. Several players from local leagues suffered because of this. Fortunately, not fatally, but injuries could have been avoided. They talked about work while preparing dinner together. This was a pleasant routine that Ginny valued greatly after all the adventures of recent days. Over dinner, she told Harry about the offers she had received. What do you think? She asked, finishing her story. Harry was silent for several minutes, considering what he'd heard. I think all 3 offers are excellent, he finally said. The question is what you want yourself. I don't know, Ginny sighed. Part of me is attracted to the opportunity to work at the international level to make real changes in sport. But part of me is frightened by constant travel and uncertainty. What about the job at the Prophet? Deputy editor is a serious step up. Yes, but I'm worried I'll lose touch with fieldwork. Become more of an administrator than a journalist. Harry reached across the table and took her hand. Gin, you've just conducted one of the most important investigations in sports journalism history. You risked your life, exposed corruption, changed an entire industry. I think you've earned the right to choose what you really want to do. What if I make the wrong choice? There's no wrong choice. There are different paths, and you can always change direction if you want to. That evening Ginny spent in contemplation. She walked around the garden, looked at the stars, and tried to understand what she really wanted. The next morning, the decision came by itself. She woke with a clear head and precise understanding of what she needed to do. Over breakfast, she shared her decision with Harry. I'm going to refuse all 3 offers, she said. Harry looked up from his newspaper. Really? Why? Because none of them gives me what I really want. I want to remain a field journalist. I want to be where the action is happening. I want to tell stories that matter, but I don't want to sit behind a desk and manage other people. And what will you do? I'll propose a compromise to Cuff. I'll stay in my current position, but with the right to select interesting investigations. Not only in sport, but in all spheres. And I'll ask for a 30% salary increase instead of 60. What about the International Commission? I'll propose cooperation on a consultancy basis. Not permanent work, but individual projects. When help with investigation is needed, I'll come. But I'll live here. Harry smiled. I like this plan. Really? Really? You know what you want and find a way to achieve it. That's very, very you. That day Ginny telephoned Cuff and outlined her proposal. The editor-in-chief wasn't thrilled about refusing the deputy position, but agreed to the compromise. All right, he said. Stay in your current position, but you'll have special status, senior investigator. You'll have the right to choose the topics you work on, and can always refuse routine tasks in favor of serious stories. Ginny wrote a reasoned response to the Ethics Commission, proposing project-based cooperation. The reply came the very next day. Dear Mrs. Potter, we understand your decision with complete comprehension and gladly accept the offer of cooperation. Your experience will be very useful for our work. We look forward to collaborating with you on future projects." A week later, Ginny received another letter, this time from an unexpected person. Sam Crawford, captain of the Vimborn Wasps, wrote, "Dear Ginny, I want to thank you for what you did during the tournament. Thanks to your investigation, I learned the truth about the injury that prevented me from playing normally in the first match. Medical examination showed I had traces of a weak poisoning potion in my blood that affected coordination. Grimm and his people were sabotaging players even before matches began. Without your work, we would never have learned this. The team has decided to invite you to our first match of the new season as an honored guest. I hope you can attend. With respect and gratitude, Sam Crawford." Ginny smiled, reading the letter. This was the best reward for everything she had gone through. That evening, she and Harry sat in the garden, watching the sunset. The magical roses around them glowed with soft pink light, and the air held the scent of summer and flowers. "Do you regret refusing those offers?" Harry asked. "No," Ginny replied without hesitation. "I made the right choice. Do you know what this story taught me?" "What?" "That the most important stories often turn out not to be the ones you plan to tell. I went to Switzerland to write an ordinary sports report and returned with an investigation that changed an entire industry." "And what does that mean?" "It means you have to stay open to the unexpected. You can't know in advance where your next big story is waiting. It might be in an ordinary local team match or at a prestigious international tournament. The main thing is to always be ready to see it and investigate." Harry took her hand. "What about us? Did this story also change something between us?" Ginny turned to him and smiled. "Yes, it changed. It showed me how lucky I am to have a husband who supports me even when I throw myself into dangerous adventures, who trusts my professionalism and doesn't try to hold me back. Even when I worry about you terribly, especially then, worrying is natural, but you give me the freedom to be who I am. And that's the best gift a husband can give his wife." They sat in silence, contemplating how the last rays of sun disappeared behind neighboring rooftops. Ginny thought about everything that had happened over the past week and felt deep satisfaction with life. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of owls carrying mail to various houses could be heard. Perhaps one of them was flying to her with a new interesting story for investigation. Perhaps tomorrow she would hear about something that would become the beginning of the next great adventure. Or perhaps tomorrow would be an ordinary day when she would write an article about a local team match or interview a young player. And that was wonderful, because Ginny Potter knew, wherever her journalistic career might lead her, she was ready for any challenges. She had talent, experience, the support of loved ones, and most importantly, unwavering faith that the truth must always be told. Even if it meant risking her life, being chased by pursuers in Alpine skies, or dueling with corrupt wizards on a Quidditch pitch. Because this was her job, this was her calling, and she was ready for the next story waiting around the corner.